Before we move on to more than 3 stocks, let's get these charts out of the way and talk a little bit about matrices and an easier way to do some of this math. So for example, when we calculated the expected return on our portfolio, we multiplied each weight of the stock times that stock's expected return and added them up. Another way to do that in Excel would just be to use a sum product and take the weights times the expected returns, and it does the same thing for us. And so we could do that with 100 stocks quite easily, just point the formula at the arrays. But another way we could do this is to use matrices. So when we take the individual stocks return and weight, multiply them together and add them up, this is the mathematical notation for how we do that. We're taking each individual weight times that stock's expected return and adding them up over all the stocks. Another way to do that is with matrices. And so if you'll remember, if you take a matrix with one row and many columns, and let's say it represents the weight of each stock, and you multiply that times a matrix with one column and many rows that represents the expected return of each stock, then you're left with a matrix that's one column and one row that shows the expected return of the portfolio. We can do that in Excel in 3 ways. The first, long way that we did it, the second, using the sum product that I just showed you, and the third being matrix multiplication. So let's talk about that matrix multiplication. If the two matrices are, if the first one is horizontal and the second one is vertical, then all we have to do is use MMULT to multiply them together. And so an example back on our sheet would be if our weights were over here in a column as values, then we could say do a matrix multiplication of the row array and the column array. Now anytime we use matrix multiplication, it's very important to note we have to do Control-Shift-Enter, and then we get the same answer if we copy that format. So we used matrix multiplication to get that answer. But to do that, we had to first move the expected returns of the stock into a column. Let's look at what if they were both in rows like in our original spreadsheet. Then we could use this transpose function to transpose this row of information into a column of information. Let's do that on our spreadsheet. To get these numbers, we could have come in and highlighted the space we wanted them, said transpose, and transpose that array. And again, I'm going to have to Control-Shift-Enter. And more importantly, just as importantly, I had to have all 3 cells highlighted, so I had room for 3 answers to go. And you can see that gives us the same answer as cutting and pasting did, copy pasting. So now, instead of having our matrix multiplication looking at a transposed matrix, we could do that transposition inside of the formula. So we could have said matrix multiply this array times the transpose of this array, and then Control-Shift-Enter, and we get the same answer. So let's clean this up and review a little bit. We'll copy this tab, call it 3 stock matrix. Clean up this excess from our old tab. And even clean it up from our new tab. And let's recalculate this expected return column using the matrix multiply of the weights times the transposed expected returns. And just like any other Excel formula, if I want to copy that down, don't need a D on transposed. If I need to copy that down, I want the weights to move down with me, but I want the returns to stay where they are, so we'll hit F4 and lock those cells, and then Control-Shift-Enter. So the 3.8 remains the same. If I copy it, the 12.8 remains the same, and so on. So now we've replaced this formula with this formula. And in fact, that will work for any number of stocks as long as the number of weights is the same as the number of returns. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this row. In the next video, we'll learn how to replace this thing with an array formula and can delete that row.